I got a tweet from Travis alerting me to another tweet from an account called 90% METS. 90% of this person's tweets are related to the New York Mets, hence the name 90% METS. This person put together on his own a tournament bracket in the spirit of March Madness, which is coming up soon. He calls it Met Madness, listing 32 of the most bizarre Mets-related stories of his lifetime. Now, he could have expanded this bracket from 32 to 64, but we can add a few more here as we go along. I'm going to read off each of these, and even if you're not a Mets fan, even if you're not a baseball fan, you will not believe that some of these are even real. But they are. Oh, they are. You don't have to be a baseball fan to enjoy this. If you are a lifelong Mets fan like I am, I went to my first Mets game. I had to be 5 years old probably when I went to my first Mets game. I still have the yearbook hidden away somewhere that I got from one of the games that year from Shea Stadium. Whatever year that was, probably 87 or 88. I got that laying around here somewhere. So for me, I've been a lifelong Mets fan. You probably know, if you are the same, about many of these events. You know about them all too well. Some of you can chalk it up to bad luck. Others you can chalk up to just sheer incompetence. And this is appropriate given the latest fiasco involving this team. The news that broke this week, fans have been clamoring for years for the Wilpons to sell the team. They blame ownership for all of the team's problems, not winning a World Series in over 30 years, although they did come close 5 years ago. Then a few weeks ago, this billionaire hedge fund manager, Steve Cohen, worth something like $13 billion, huge Mets fan, he already owns an 8% minority stake in the team, reaches a deal, or is close to a deal, for 80% ownership of the team. He's going to take ownership of the team, majority ownership, away from the Wilpon family for $2.6 billion. The Mets are going to be sold for $2.6 billion, with Fred Wilpon, the owner of the team, and his son Jeff keeping their titles and staying on for 5 more years. And you remember hearing that and thinking to myself, well, that's bizarre. What person, what millionaire or billionaire is going to put their money in to the tune of $2.6 billion and agree to basically keep his hands off and let the people still run the team for 5 more years? Who would agree to that? But the fans rejoiced. They were excited. Finally, we're going to have all this money now put into the team, and it's going to be a fresh start for the team. This is great. And then this week, the deal collapsed. Reportedly, because the son, Jeff, screwed the whole thing up and didn't want to give up control, or they wanted to extend that 5-year period, whatever it was. Nobody knows for sure. Whatever it was, who the hell would spend $2.6 billion of their money on anything and not want to take full control right away? So the deal is dead. Cohen says he gave it his best shot. That's the story of the Mets. They give you that one glimmer of hope, and then they snatch it away from you, just like that. We're having a great time here in New York lately. The biggest media market in the world. We have the Mets, the Jets, and the Knicks, where the owner was just serenaded by 20,000 people the other night in Madison Square Garden with chants of "sell the team," because the Knicks may be an even bigger embarrassment than the Mets. Maybe. I don't know. It's pretty close. All of this comes only a few weeks after the Mets got rid of their newly hired manager, Carlos Beltran, who was ousted after being revealed as a central figure in that whole Houston Astros cheating scandal back when he was still a player. So before he even took the field to manage a single game for the New York Mets, he's gone. And it's only February. Pitchers and catchers don't even report until tomorrow. I can only imagine what surprises await us for the 2020 season. Now, those are only 2 of the most recent examples of the Mets' good fortune. Here's 32 others from this Mets Madness bracket. Place your bets now on which one you think is going all the way to the end. I'll reveal at the end which one I think would be the winner in my bracket. I'll be, as I go along here, I'm going to be filling in descriptions for each of these on my own just to give you some context. We have Kevin Mitchell, who played for the '86 Mets that won the World Series, the last Mets team that won the World Series. He once decapitated his girlfriend's cat in a fit of rage. Now, this has been an urban legend over the years. His ex-teammate Doc Gooden is the one who told this story in his book. It's never been proven. And when you consider Doc Gooden's history, I mean, I'd be skeptical of anything he says. But it made the bracket. So we have a decapitation here as the first entry in the bracket. Always a good way to start. There was the time that the Mets official Twitter account tweeted out a photo in the clubhouse with a large dildo sitting in Kevin Plawecki's locker in full view. See, that one I think is kind of funny, actually. That was a rib on him. I think that's kind of funny. We had the '86 brawl with 4 Mets players and 2 police officers at a bar in Houston. We have, after the Mets manager, Bobby Valentine, said that he thought baseball was ready for an openly gay baseball player. He was asked a question by a media member. He was asked the question, and he said, I think baseball's ready for an openly gay baseball player. Mike Piazza, who played for the Mets and was one of the biggest stars on the Mets, who was not named in any of this, although there were rumors about his sexuality floating around. But this was just Bobby V answering a question. Nobody said anything about Mike Piazza. But Mike Piazza called a press conference the next day to announce that he is not gay. I am not gay, he says. Even though nobody ever explicitly said he was, he called a press conference to announce that he wasn't gay. There was the fiasco with Carlos Beltran when he went in for surgery. I think it was a microfracture surgery or something on his knee. He went in for surgery that the Mets claimed they weren't even aware of. And the owner of the team tried calling him while he was in surgery. 2 years ago, there was the embarrassing moment when the Mets were called out by the umpires for batting out of order. Yes, that actually happened. We had Bernie Madoff. I mean, need I say more? Let's see. We've got our GM, Brody Van Wagenen, sending pitching changes from his living room. See, I hadn't heard that one before. Maybe I just blocked it out of my memory. I do remember Brody last summer, in his first season as the GM for the team, throwing a chair in a fit of rage in the clubhouse during a team meeting. That I do remember. We have Vince Coleman throwing firecrackers is the next entry here in the bracket. Coleman was playing for the Mets at the time. They were out in LA. They were playing the Dodgers. He tossed the firecracker out of the Jeep that he was riding in the Dodger Stadium parking lot, and 3 people were injured, including a 1-year-old. What an idiot. That same season, after the cherry bomb attack, I think it was a cherry bomb that he threw. That same season, after the cherry bomb attack, another Mets player, Brett Saberhagen, he squirted 3 reporters in the clubhouse with a water gun filled with bleach. We had the time a few years ago that Mr. Met gave the middle finger to the fans. Now what happened is, some fan was saying things about Mr. Met's mother, and the person in the costume, as they were headed back through the tunnel, turned around and gave them the finger. I can't even say middle finger because Mr. Met only has 3 fingers and a thumb. But somebody shot video of it with their phone, and they weren't fired, but that person never wore the Mr. Met costume ever again. He was reassigned to some other job within the organization. We had Matt Harvey, not to be confused with his brother Jeff Harvey, who wrestled for WWE. We had Matt Harvey, drunk and heartbroken, misses a game. Yes. Yes, indeed. Matt Harvey was out partying until 4 a.m. on a Friday night because he was distraught after seeing photos of his gal pal, Adriana Lima, out on the town with Julian Edelman of the New England Patriots. And he was so hammered that he no-showed the Mets game the next day. And he ended up getting suspended for 3 days without pay. We had Darryl Strawberry attacking his teammate Keith Hernandez on Team Picture Day in 1989 when the team was having its yearbook photo taken. They nearly came to blows. They had to be restrained and pulled apart. And they made up afterwards, but yeah. Team Picture Day took a very dark turn in 1989. We had the team's general manager back in the late 90s, Steve Phillips, took a leave of absence after being accused of sexual harassment. Not the last time that would happen with Steve Phillips. We had Carlos Beltran being fired as the team manager before a single game. That's on here. I just talked about that. And rounding out the left side of the bracket, Brandon Nimmo poisons himself. The Mets outfielder, he got hit by a case of food poisoning after eating undercooked chicken that he had prepared for himself. So he poisoned himself. And the manager said that they would have to teach Nimmo how to cook. We shift over to the right side of the bracket. And our opening contest, scheduled for one fall, is Yoenis Cespedes being attacked by a wild boar. Cespedes is one of the best players on the Mets. I mean, he's been injured now for the longest time, but he's one of the just best hitters that we've got. And he fractured his right ankle. I think it was the year before last. He fractured his right ankle while he was on his ranch. Now, the Mets originally said he took a violent fall after he stepped into a hole and he twisted his ankle. About a month ago, though, we actually learned the full story, which is that he has traps all over his ranch, including for boars. And I guess one boar escaped, or they were removing one from the trap, and it either charged at Cespedes or it scared him in some way. It startled him, and that caused him to step into a hole, and he fractured his ankle. No word on whether the boar managed to escape, although I hear he's now in witness protection, working at a Cinnabon. Matt Harvey. Back to Matt Harvey again. The year before, he stayed out too late because he was depressed over Adriana Lima being seen with Julian Edelman. He missed his final spring training start due to a bladder infection that caused a blood clot in his urine. All because, and I quote, "I hold my urine in for too long." So because he held it in and didn't pee for a long time, he got an infection and he missed the game. Vince Coleman, the same year that he tossed that cherry bomb, also inadvertently injured Doc Gooden after swinging a golf club in the Mets clubhouse, causing Gooden to miss his next pitching start. Just last season, in 2019, Mets manager, I guess now ex-manager, Mickey Callaway, he cursed at a New York Newsday reporter who merely said, "See you tomorrow," after Callaway's usual post-game press conference concluded in the clubhouse. Said, "See you tomorrow, Mickey." And Callaway responded by calling him a motherfucker and then demanded that he leave the clubhouse. And when he didn't, Mets pitcher Jason Vargas, ever the tough guy, threatened to knock him out. "I'll knock you the fuck out, bro," he told him. "I'll knock you the fuck out." That's what he told him. The Mets had to personally apologize to the reporter later that day. Imagine just saying to somebody, "See you tomorrow," and they respond by calling you a motherfucker. And this is the manager of the team. This is not some player, some random employee. Unbelievable. Then we had Mets manager Bobby Valentine, after being ejected from a game. This is actually one of the greatest moments in Mets history. He later reemerged. Because when you get ejected from the game, you're gone. You can't come back out. You got to go to the clubhouse and stay there. So he gets ejected from the game. He later reemerges. The cameras pick up on him reemerging in the dugout wearing a fake mustache and sunglasses as some sort of disguise. Major League Baseball was not amused. They fined him $5,000 and suspended him for 2 games. But I actually think that's one of the greatest moments in Mets history. Willie Randolph, fired by the Mets at 3 o'clock in the morning. Ah, yes, the Mets fired. Now, when the Mets fired Willie Randolph is a known name in New York. He used to play for the Yankees, so he was the Mets manager for a while. And when they fired him, it wasn't really a big surprise because the team wasn't doing great. So you kind of knew he was on the bubble anyway. Team was no good. What they did, though, was they waited until he and the team flew all the way out to the West Coast for the start of a 6-game road trip. It was a long road trip. And it was maybe, I don't know, the second night maybe of the road trip. And this was after a game that they won. At 3 o'clock in the morning, so this is now after all of the reporters would have already submitted their stories for the next day, right? Very, very convenient how that worked. They fired him. They waited until 3 o'clock in the morning, and they fired Willie Randolph. Very classy. We had Tony Bernizard, who was a Mets executive at the time, launched into a tirade on the bus with one of their minor league teams. He ripped his shirt off, and he threatened to fight them. And he was fired a week later. Now, that would be embarrassing enough. You would think that the Mets would want to play, damage control. Let's sweep this up and kind of move on from here. But they took a bad situation and they made it worse. So a week later, they fire him. They did a little investigation and they fired him. And they held a press conference. At the press conference to announce his firing, Omar Minaya, who was the GM at the time, in the middle of this press conference, I think he was asked a question by Adam Rubin, who was the Mets beat reporter for the New York Daily News. He accuses Adam Rubin, who broke the story on Bernizard, so I'm sure that pissed the Mets off. He accused him of angling for a job with the team, I guess insinuating that he was trying to discredit Tony Bernizard and get him to lose his job, which would then create an opening for him to take his job. I guess that's what they were insinuating. So, now the Mets fired Bernizard, mind you. They found cause to fire him, which meant there was merit to the story. And so instead of dealing with one embarrassing story and moving on, they created another controversy by accusing the reporter who broke the story of having an ulterior motive for doing so. That may be the most Mets thing that the Mets have ever Metsed. For a team known for its injuries, this one may be a topper. A couple seasons ago, Noah Syndergaard, one of their best, actually it might have been more than a couple of seasons, but Noah Syndergaard, one of their best pitchers, was diagnosed with hand, foot, and mouth disease. I remember that season. I was waiting for another player to be diagnosed with the bubonic plague. Sometimes I think this team is a plague. There was the time that Doc Gooden missed the team's championship victory parade in 1986 because he was busy smoking crack in the Long Island projects. We had the Mets' mishandling of Ryan Church's concussion by sending him on an airplane right after he had suffered said concussion. And we had the now infamous clubhouse poker game between Ricky Henderson and Bobby Bonilla during a playoff game in 1999. This was Game 6 of the NLCS against the Braves. It was a back-and-forth game. It went into extra innings. One team would get the lead, the other team would tie. This was not some kind of lopsided event, and it was a playoff game. Game 6. Now, they lost in the end, but for the last 3 innings of the game, Ricky Henderson and Bobby Bonilla were in the clubhouse playing cards. And that created a whole shitstorm at the time. And, he said in later years, it's all Ricky's fault. I think Ricky had been taken out of the game and was upset, and he knew to calm him down. He would play cards, and he just went along with it. But just imagine, your team is in the middle of this playoff game. And everyone, should be in the dugout on the step watching, even if you're not playing. And they're playing cards. They're playing cards in the clubhouse. Speaking of Bobby Bonilla, there was the time that he once threatened physical violence against a reporter and told him, "I'll hurt you. I'll show you the Bronx." Well, that doesn't sound very nice. David Cohn is a pitcher. He was once sued for sexual harassment while playing for the Mets and accused of luring 3 women into the bullpen at Shea Stadium and masturbating in front of them. Now, 2 of the women had their claims dismissed. I believe he settled with the other one, so there's always been a question of whether or not this ever really happened. But hey, look, some guys chew sunflower seeds to let off some steam, and, other guys rub one out in the bullpen, I guess. So here we're now in the home stretch here with this bracket. This is one of my favorites. This may be the one. Last summer, the Mets were paying tribute to the 1969 Mets, who won the team's first World Series. It was 50 years ago, 50-year anniversary of their first World Championship. And they played a tribute video, a very nice tribute video before one of the games last season to remember all of the players that have passed away. The problem is, 2 of the players that they paid tribute to and included in this in memoriam video are very much still alive. I'm sure that was news to them and their families. There was the time that one of the Mets pitchers, Francisco Rodriguez, K-Rod, he assaulted his father-in-law in the players' family lounge at Citi Field. Always good to get some family time in there. And rounding out the bracket is the big controversy from 2002 over, which is really silly now all these years later looking back. But this was a big controversy over a whole bunch of Mets players sneaking weed into Shea Stadium and having a massive drug problem with marijuana at the time. Again, this would not be much of a story today, but I will say this, given their performance that year, if it proves one thing, it's that marijuana is definitely not a performance-enhancing drug. So I could go on and on. I mean, there's so many more not even included in this bracket. I really think he could have gotten to 64 instead of the 32 if he wanted to. I mean, you had Ray Ordonez one year saying he didn't want to play for the Mets anymore because the fans here are too stupid. You have to be perfect in every game, and he couldn't stand being here anymore. When one of your own players says the team's own city is filled with stupid people, that's not a good look. Or the year that the team failed to make the playoffs after blowing a 7-game lead in their division and losing 12 of their last 17 games that season. Yeah, that hurt. That was an all-timer. That set some records. Tom Glavine riding in a cab. His cab to the stadium. His cab gets hit. I think he was going to the stadium. His cab gets hit by an SUV. He loses his 2 front teeth. Then 2 years later, Duaner Sanchez is in a cab. Gets sideswiped by a drunk driver. He gets a separated shoulder. That ends his season. I think the lesson here is walk or take the train. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Marlon Byrd. Marlon Byrd being traded to another team hours before the Mets hosted Marlon Byrd t-shirt night at Citi Field. I love this team. I hate this team, but I love this team. Does that make sense? Am I making sense here? I have a similar love-hate relationship with WWE. But with the Mets, it's very special. I do love this team. But from the choices given in the bracket, so if I'm only limited to what this person included in the bracket, who would be the winner? I don't know. You know, smoked crack and missed the parade is a tough one to beat, but so is honoring dead people who are still alive. Ugh, it's tough. It's tough. I'm going to go with honoring dead players that are still alive. The fact that could even happen in an age where Google and Wikipedia exist is just inexcusable. Absolutely inexcusable.